Eleanor Braddock had typed for Renner Machine Works for 31 years. 31. She knew every man's payroll number by heart, every wife's name, every child's birthday. And on the morning the state bank examiner came to Ashford, Ohio, Harlan Renner walked that stranger around the long table and introduced every man in the room. He named the foreman. He named the salesman. He named the boy who ran the mimeograph. Then he came to Eleanor, and his eyes slid right over her like she was the coat rack. He snapped his fingers. 2 quick snaps. Coffee, Nell, she poured it. She did not flush. She set the cup down at his right hand exactly where he liked it, handle turned out, and she went back to her chair by the window. Later, when she slid him a small memo, folded once, quiet, a single figure circled in pencil because it didn't foot. Because the number on the left did not match the number on the right, and she was the only soul in that building who noticed. Harlan opened it, read it, and laughed. He laughed for the 6 men in the room. He held it up like a child's drawing. "You're only the secretary, Nell. Type what I give you, and leave the thinking to us." The men chuckled the way men do. And Eleanor smiled the small smile she kept for exactly these moments, and folded her hands. That night, I did something I hadn't done in 9 years. I took down a hatbox from the top of the closet. If you've ever been treated as furniture by the very people who depended on you, if you've ever been the one who kept it all running while they took the credit, this story is for you. Before I go on, do one thing for me. Subscribe so you don't miss how this ends, and comment the town you're watching from. I want to see how far Nell's story travels. Ashford was a small place. Let's see how big this gets. Now, let me tell you how it started, and let me tell you slow, because the slow part matters. Eleanor Braddock was 58 years old that summer. She had come to Renner Machine Works as a girl of 27, a widow already, her husband gone under the ice on Lake Erie 2 winters into the marriage. She never remarried. She never talked about it. What she did was work. She built the filing system for that firm with her own 2 hands. Before her, the invoices lived in shoeboxes and a man's memory. After her, there was a place for everything, and everything sat in its place, and when a machine part shipped to a customer in Toledo, there was a card that said so, and a carbon that proved it. The men called her the machine that never breaks. They meant it kindly, most of them. She came in before the whistle, and she left after the lights. When Harlan's father ran the place, old Gus Renner, dead now 15 years, he used to say Eleanor knew more about the company than he did. And he wasn't joking. And he wasn't wrong. She knew the pension best of all. That was the thing she loved. Not the money for herself, though there was a little in there with her name on it. What she loved was the promise. Every man on that shop floor had a number in the pension book, and that number meant that when his hands finally gave out, when his back finally quit, he would not be turned out to sit on a porch with nothing. Ray Kowalczyk had 38 years in. Ray was 60, and Ray's knees were shot, and Ray's whole retirement lived in that fund like money in a church poor box. Eleanor had typed the pension statements every quarter for 3 decades. She thought of it as a kind of prayer, she said with her fingers. In 1958, the firm hit a wall. Orders dried up. Harlan's father called her into the office. This was near the end, when the old man's heart was failing, and he told her they would have to lay men off. Eleanor did the arithmetic in her head right there. She told him to cut her pay instead. $12 a week, she said. Take it from me and keep Ostrowski and keep the Delgado boy. The old man argued. She won. She always won the quiet ones. Nobody on that floor ever knew their jobs had been bought with her wages. That was the way she liked it. Useful and silent. She believed, all the way down in her bones, that being useful and being silent was its own kind of armor. If you never asked for anything, they could never take anything from you. That was her mistake. But we'll get to that. Harlan Renner was the son, He was 61 now and going soft in the middle, and he wore his father's chair like a costume that had never quite fit. He was not a stupid man. He was worse than stupid. He was a man clever enough to cut corners and vain enough to think nobody could see him do it. He had a way of talking that made bankers nod and made his own men look at their shoes. He called Eleanor Nell, which she had never given him permission to do, and he said it the way you'd say the name of a dog you were fond of. Here is the thing you have to understand about that summer. There was a clock ticking that only two people in Ashford could hear. One was Harlan. The other was Eleanor, though Harlan would have laughed himself sick to know it. 26 days, that was the count. In 26 days, a man named Frank Ostergaard, examiner for the State Banking Authority, would come back to Renner Machine Works with his briefcase and his green ledger paper and his sharp little pencil, and he would go through the company's books line by line. Because the firm carried a note at the Ashford savings, and the state wanted to know the note was good before it was rolled over. An audit. A real one. Numbers under a lamp. Harlan had a plan for that audit. It started, like a lot of terrible things, with 2 sheets of paper. It was a Tuesday when he handed them to her. He came out of his office with 2 folders, and he set them on her desk, one and then the other, the way you deal cards. "Working copy," he said, tapping the first. "And the bank copy." He tapped the second. "Type 'em both up clean for me, Nell. Bank copy's the one goes in the binder for Ostergaard." Now you have to know, she had typed 2 sets of figures for years. It was not new. A working copy, a rough set the shop used to run itself, and a fair copy, the one that went to the bank and the note holders. For a long time, the 2 sets said the same thing in different clothes. That was ordinary. That was bookkeeping. Eleanor had never wasted a carbon in her life. She'd tell you that herself if you asked. Every fair copy she typed with a carbon behind it, a flimsy second sheet catching every keystroke in purple, and when the fair copy went into the binder, the carbon went home in her handbag and, come Sunday, into a hatbox on the top shelf of her bedroom closet. "Same as my mother taught me," she'd say. "My mother saved string and buttons and the good paper from Christmas. I save carbons. You never know what a thing is worth till the day you need it." She had said that so many times over the years that nobody heard it anymore. It was furniture talk. It was the kind of thing the machine that never breaks says while it's breaking nothing. Nobody in that building, least of all Harlan Renner, ever once stopped to think about what 9 years of carbons in a hatbox actually was. I want you to remember the hatbox. Keep it in the corner of your eye. We'll come back to it, and when we do, everything changes. So she typed the 2 sets. And here is where the floor started to tilt. Slow. The way a ship tilts before the men on deck feel it in their feet. Because that summer, for the first time, the 2 sets didn't just wear different clothes. They told different stories. The working copy said the firm was tired. Orders thin. Margins scraped down to the bone. That was the truth, and Eleanor knew it was the truth. Because she typed the orders and she knew there weren't enough of them. The bank copy said the firm was fat and healthy. Revenue up 19% over the year before. It said Renner Machine Works had booked a run of jobs that summer that Eleanor could not find one shred of paper for anywhere in her own perfect files. No customer card, no shipping carbon, no invoice. Ghost orders. Money that had never come in the door, sitting on the bank copy like a fresh coat of paint on a rotten sill. She typed it anyway. Her fingers did not slow down. That was the discipline of 31 years. But her mind, which everyone assumed was empty as a clean sheet, was reading every number as it went by. And her mind said, quietly, "That is not right. That is not a mistake. A mistake goes one way. This went one way on purpose, and it went it big." She did the only thing a woman in her position could do, the thing she had done 100 times before. She wrote a memo. Just a few lines. Polite, deferential, she flagged the revenue figure, the one she couldn't foot, and she noted respectfully that she could not locate supporting documents for 4 of the listed jobs, and asked whether the customer files had perhaps been kept elsewhere. She folded it once. She carried it into his office at a moment when Ray Kowalczyk happened to be standing there, going over a parts requisition, because some part of her, some old careful part, wanted a witness in the room. She could not have told you why. She just knew to want one. Harlan read it. And he laughed. He laughed the same laugh he'd laugh a week later in front of the examiner. But this time it was just Ray who watched. He waved the memo in the air. "Nell here's found herself a hobby," he said to Ray, grinning. "You want to be an accountant now, Nell? You want the green eye shade?" And Ray, God bless him, didn't laugh with him. Ray just looked at the floor, and then looked at Eleanor, and something passed between them, 60 years old, the both of them, that Harlan was far too pleased with himself to notice. "Files are handled upstairs now," Harlan said, which meant nothing, which was a door closing. "You just type, 'Nell, that's the good girl.'" And he handed her memo back to her instead of keeping it, which was the kind of small mistake a careful man doesn't make. She took it. She smoothed it flat. She put it in her handbag. 2 offenses now. 1 private, the skipped introduction, the snapped fingers. 1 witnessed, the memo mocked in front of Ray. If you're keeping count, keep counting. The 3rd one's coming, and the 3rd one's the one that turns a wound into a debt. But first, she watched. That was Eleanor's gift, the one nobody valued. She sat at the window desk, and she typed what they gave her, and she watched where the money went, because it all came across her machine sooner or later. Every check the firm cut, she typed the stub. Every account it paid into, she typed the name. And that summer, a new name started coming across her desk. Meridian Supply Company. Payments going out to Meridian Supply. Big ones, round ones, the kind of numbers that don't have cents on the end because nobody actually bought anything. They just moved money. Eleanor had typed every supplier Renner Machine Works had used in 3 decades. She knew the steel man and the bearing man and the fella in Cleveland who sold them cutting oil by the drum. She had never in her life heard of Meridian Supply Company. There was no Meridian in the files. There was no address for Meridian but a post office box in Columbus. There were no shipments from Meridian, no bills of lading, no packing slips. There was only money, flowing out of the company's real account and into Meridian's, steady as a slow leak. Cash, moving to a supplier that did not exist. She understood what she was looking at. She'd have to have been a fool not to, and Eleanor Braddock was nobody's fool. Harlan was pulling money out of the firm through a paper company he'd made up, skimming it off before the examiner could count it, salting it away somewhere with his own name on it and no one else's. Inflate the books for the bank so the firm looks worth buying. Bleed the cash out the back through Meridian so when he sells the shell, the money's already his and gone. She could see the whole shape of it from her chair by the window, the way you can see the whole shape of a storm from a hilltop, while the people down in the valley just feel the first cold drops and wonder if they need a coat. She told no one. What would she tell? Who would she tell it to? She was only the secretary. She typed what she was given, and she left the thinking to them. Everyone knew that. Then came the boardroom, and the 3rd offense, the public one, the one with an audience and a witness list. Frank Ostergaard came for a preliminary sit-down, a friendly visit before the real audit, the kind where the examiner shakes hands and gets a feel for the place and lets himself be shown around. Harlan had the long table polished. He had the 6 men in their good shirts. He had the coffee service out, the good cups, and he had Eleanor to pour, because of course he did. He was magnificent that afternoon. You had to give the devil that. He walked Ostergaard through the firm's health like a doctor showing off a patient he'd cured himself. Revenue up. Orders strong. A tight ship. A proud old Ashford name. 3 generations of Renners keeping men in work. He took the credit for all of it, the ghost orders and the real ones both. And Ostergaard nodded and made his little notes and was, you could see it, charmed. Charmed by the confidence of the man. That's the thing about a con, the Mark wants to believe, because believing is easier, and Harlan gave him a good clean story to believe. Halfway through, Harlan wanted more coffee. He didn't ask. He never asked. He lifted his cup 2 inches off the saucer, and he snapped his fingers, 2 quick snaps without breaking his sentence, without turning his head, the way you'd signal to a dog under the table. Eleanor rose. She crossed the room. She poured. Handle turned out. And Ostergaard, being a decent enough man, said something kind. He thanked her, called her ma'am, asked how long she'd been with the firm. Just being polite. And Harlan Renner saw a chance to be witty in front of the state of Ohio, and he took it. He laughed his laugh. He set his hand flat on the table. And in front of all 6 of them, in front of the examiner, in front of Ray Kowalczyk, who had been brought in to speak for the shop floor, Harlan said it. He said it slow, so everyone could enjoy it. Oh, don't mind Nell. She's been here longer than the furniture. But you don't ask the furniture how the business is doing. He chuckled. The men chuckled, most of them, the way men chuckle when the boss is watching to see if they will. You're only the secretary, Nell, he said, and he was talking to her now, over his shoulder, a scrap thrown to a dog. Type what I give you and leave the thinking to us. That's a girl. The clock on the wall ticked. The same clock, the big oak-cased clock old Gus Renner had bought in 1941 that hung over the head of that table and had watched everything that ever happened under it. Eleanor finished pouring. She did not rush, and she did not flush. She set the pot back on the tray. She turned the handle of Harlan's cup out, just so, and she straightened. And for 1/2 of 1 second her eyes went to Ray, and Ray's went to hers, and Ray's jaw was tight as a bolt. Then she said, "Will there be anything else, Mr. Renner?" Not a question. There was no question in it anywhere. And she walked back to her chair by the window and sat down and folded her hands and said nothing at all. 6 men had heard it. That was the difference. A wound you take alone, you can carry alone. A wound taken in front of witnesses is a different animal. It becomes a fact in other men's memories. A thing that happened. A debt entered in a book that more than one person keeps. Harlan thought he'd made a joke. What he'd actually done was sign something. He'd put his name in front of 6 witnesses. To the idea that the woman who typed his numbers was too stupid to understand them. He would come to wish, more than he had ever wished for anything, that he had introduced her to the examiner instead. But by then it would be far, far too late, and that is the whole pleasure of this story, so stay with me. She went home that night on the 6:15 bus. She made herself an egg. She did the 2 dishes. And then Eleanor Braddock stood in her bedroom in the last honey light coming gold through the screen, and she looked up at the top shelf of her closet, and she reached up with both hands, and she took down the hatbox. It was an old thing, round, striped, the lid soft at the corners from 30 years of coming down and going up. Her mother's, once. Eleanor had kept a wedding hat in it for 2 winters, and then, when there was no more reason for wedding hats, she'd kept carbons in it instead. 9 years of them. Every fair copy she'd typed since '64. The purple ghost of every number that had ever gone to the bank or the note holders, layered in there flat and neat. The newest on top. The oldest gone soft as cloth at the bottom. She sat on the edge of the bed. She took out the top layer, that summer's carbons, the bank copies she'd typed with the ghost orders and the fat revenue and the healthy shining lie. And beside them on the quilt she laid the working copies she'd also kept, because she kept everything, the tired true numbers, the thin real orders, the firm as it actually was. And she read them, side by side. I want to tell you what that was. Because it wasn't rage, not yet, though the rage was in there somewhere under the floor. It was arithmetic. It was the most careful arithmetic of her life. She went line by line, the true against the false, the way Ostergaard would go line by line in 26 days, except she wasn't a stranger with a briefcase. She was the woman who'd typed both. She knew where every ghost was buried, because she dug every grave herself, on his orders, with a smile. And here is what she understood, sitting on that quilt in the dark, and it went through her like cold water. She was the only person alive who held both truths. Harlan had the false books. The bank had the false books. Poor Ostergaard would get the false books all tied up in a binder with a ribbon. And the true books, the real, tired, honest numbers, lived nowhere on this earth except in her own hands, in her own clean, unmistakable type, backed up by 9 years of carbons in a striped hatbox that a vain man had never once thought to wonder about. She was not furniture. Furniture doesn't keep the receipts. Something changed in her that night. Not loud. Eleanor never did anything loud. But the woman who reached up for that hatbox and the woman who put it back down were not quite the same woman, and if you'd been in that room you'd have felt it, the way the air changes before rain. The pain was still there. But it had a shape now. It had a purpose. It had, God help Harlan Renner, a plan beginning to gather at the edges of it. She didn't sleep much. Around 2 she got up and made tea and sat at her own little table with a fresh legal pad, and she started reading forward, deeper into the true carbons, because she realized she'd only ever typed these things one at a time, month by month. And she had never sat down and read 9 years of them as a single story. Now she did. And the story got worse. She found the pension. It was buried 3 transfers deep, disguised the way a man disguises a thing when he thinks no one who understands it will ever look. There was a movement of funds that sprang out of the employees' pension trust, the sacred book, raise 38 years, the Delgado boys' future, the money that had been bought once already with $12 a week of her own wages back in '58, out of the pension and into the general account, and from there, in pieces, out the back door to Meridian Supply Company that did not exist. She sat with her pencil and she footed it herself, 3 times. Because the number was so large she didn't trust her own eyes. $214,000. $214,000 pulled from the men's retirement and run out through a ghost. That was not corner cutting. That was not clever bookkeeping. That was the roof over Ray Kowalczyk's old age, sold out from under him while he stood on the shop floor in his good shirt and chuckled at his boss's joke about the furniture. Eleanor put down the pencil. Her hand was steady. That surprised her a little. She would have expected it to shake. And then she found the last thing, the thing that turned the whole cold arithmetic into something she could not walk away from, even if she'd wanted to. She found Curtis. Curtis Vane was 24 years old. He was the junior bookkeeper, a serious boy with a bad haircut, and a mother in Sandusky he sent money to. Harlan had taken a shine to him that spring, everybody said so, had started calling him into the office. Started grooming him for better things, a promotion, a title, a raise. Curtis walked 2 inches taller for it. He thought the sun rose and set on Harlan Renner. He thought loyalty was a virtue and that his was being rewarded. Reading forward, Eleanor saw what was actually being built. The signatures. The doctored statements, the bank copies, the false ones, the ghost order revenue, and the drained pension, and the Meridian payments were being routed, one careful signature line at a time, so that when it all came due, when the note came in and the questions started. The name at the bottom of the fraud would be Curtis Vanes, junior bookkeeper, 24. Handled the numbers, Your Honor. Signed the statements. Right there, see? That's his signature. Harlan would be shocked to learn what young Vane had done. And Curtis, loyal foolish Curtis, was signing them. Because Harlan told him to, and Harlan was the man who'd noticed him. And a boy that hungry for a father's approval will sign a great many things he doesn't read. If it blew up the way Harlan meant it to, the boy would hang. He'd go to a state facility. His mother in Sandusky would get the letter. And he'd never once have understood that the man he worshipped had picked him, out of everyone, precisely because he was too grateful to look closely. That was the moment Eleanor Braddock stopped being a woman who'd been insulted and became a woman with a decision to make. Because now it wasn't about her wounded pride. She could have swallowed her pride. She'd swallowed 31 years of it. It was about $214,000 of other men's futures. And it was about a 24-year-old boy being fitted for a noose he couldn't even see. She held the one thing on earth that could stop it. And here was the trap of it, the thing that kept her up till the birds started. How do you bring the whole thing down on the guilty man without the innocent boy going down in the rubble with him? Move too soon, move too loud, and Curtis's name is already on the paper. The evidence that damns Harlan damns Curtis right alongside him, because Harlan had built it that way on purpose. She turned that over and over. She was still turning it when the light came gray in the window and she had to get up and pin her hair and catch the 6:15 and go type another day of his lies with a smile on her face. And that was the strangest thing, the thing that took the most out of her, more than the reading, more than the arithmetic. She had to go back in. She had to sit at the window desk with everything she now knew burning behind her eyes, and she had to type the bank copies clean and fair, ghost orders and all. She had to carry Harlan his coffee and turn the handle out. She had to say good morning to Curtis Vane and not warn him. Not yet. Not until she understood how to do it without pulling the roof down. She had to be, for a little while longer, exactly the furniture Harlan believed her to be. She was very, very good at it. That was the terrible joke underneath the whole thing. 31 years of being invisible had made her the finest liar in the building, and none of them had the faintest idea, because the best disguise a person can wear is the low opinion other people already have of them. Harlan looked at her every day and saw a coat rack. He never once saw the woman keeping a legal pad in her handbag, footing his crimes on her lunch break, counting the days. 26 had become 22. 22 had become 19. The examiner was coming, and Eleanor Braddock, the machine that never breaks, was going to be ready for him in a way that Harlan Renner, in the deepest bottom of his vanity, could not have begun to imagine. She thought it through the way she filed, a place for everything. She would not confront him. Confronting him was what a proud woman would do, and pride was exactly what he expected, exactly what he could handle. A confrontation he could laugh off, could fire her over, could paint as a bitter old girl who'd gotten ideas above her station. No, she would do what she had always done. She would be quiet. She would be useful. And she would be, very quietly, the most dangerous person Harlan Renner had ever underestimated. The plan came together in pieces over those days, the way her filing system had come together 30 years before. One card at a time, until suddenly there was a whole architecture, where before there'd been shoeboxes. She would need copies she could give away. Copies that could leave her hands without emptying the hatbox, because the hatbox was the original, and you never surrender the original. That meant the photostat machine. Not at the office. Never at the office. But the county library in the next town over had a photostat machine that the public could use for a dime a page. And the county library was open on Saturdays, and nobody at Renner Machine Works had ever once, in the history of the world, wondered what Eleanor Braddock did on a Saturday. She would need a reason to keep making carbons of the true figures right up to the end, so she'd have the whole record. Current, complete. That was easy. She always made carbons. She'd just quietly ask the supply room for a little extra stock. Routine, the kind of request nobody questions from the woman who's ordered the office supplies for 3 decades. And she would need to reach the law without reaching Harlan's version of the law. Ostergaard reported to a state office. That office had an address. A plain letter, typed on her own machine at home on a Sunday, requesting a private meeting on a matter concerning a firm currently under examination, could go into a mailbox in the next county with no return address but a rented post box, and no one at Renner Machine Works would ever see it leave. She didn't send it yet. She wasn't ready yet. There were still days on the clock, and there was still Curtis to think about, and the letter, once sent, could not be unsent. But she typed it. She sat at her own kitchen table that Sunday, with the good light coming through the screen and the Royal typewriter she'd bought second-hand in 1951, and she typed the letter clean and fair, 1 carbon behind it, and she folded it and put it in the hatbox with everything else, ready, a-loaded thing, waiting on the shelf. She looked at it in there, the letter lying on top of 9 years of carbons, and she thought about the memo Harlan had waved in the air and handed back to her. She still had that too. She'd flagged the figure that didn't foot. She'd flagged it in writing, politely, with Ray Kowalczyk standing right there in the room. There was a record, thin but real, that the machine that never breaks had seen the crack and had said so out loud and been laughed at for it. Whatever came, no one could ever say she hadn't tried the quiet way first. She'd tried it in front of a witness. He'd handed it back to her with a smile. 22 days. She put the lid on the hatbox. She reached up and slid it back onto the top shelf of the closet, exactly where it had lived for 9 years, exactly where a vain man would never think to look. And she turned off the lamp. And somewhere across town, in the big house on Elm, with the porch his father built, Harlan Renner slept the good deep sleep of a man who had everything under control. He had his story straight. He had his ghost orders and his Meridian account and his loyal little bookkeeper lined up to hold the bag. He had a friendly examiner half-charmed already. And he was certain, no loose ends anywhere, because the only person in Ashford who understood every number in the whole scheme was a 58-year-old secretary who poured his coffee and knew her place, and what in God's name could she ever do about anything? He slept just fine. She didn't. But she wasn't losing sleep anymore. She was spending it. There's a difference, and by the end of this you'll know it in your bones. Because Eleanor Braddock had one more thing to decide before she mailed that letter, and it was the thing that would either save a boy or damn him. She sat in the dark that last long night before the plan went into motion, and she thought about Curtis Vane, 24 years old, signing his own death warrant one grateful signature at a time. And she thought, if I do this wrong, they take him down with the ship. If I do this right, and that was where she stopped. Because she didn't yet know how to do it right. She only knew she had 19 days to figure it out, a hatbox full of proof, a letter ready to mail, and a boy at the desk across from hers who trusted the wrong man with his whole life. The clock ran on. And for the first time in 31 years, the machine that never breaks was counting down to something, and only she could hear it tick. She waited until Saturday. That was the first decision, and it was the hardest one. Not to run to anybody, not to shout, just to wait and let the clock keep its own counsel, and move the way water moves. Slow, patient, downhill, always downhill, toward the low place where the truth would finally pool. Monday morning she came in early, the way she always did. She put the coffee on. She rolled a fresh sheet into the royal at her own desk and typed Harlan's fake figures clean and beautiful, foot perfect, not one wrong stroke. And under her calm hands the lie looked like gospel. That was the thing nobody understood about Eleanor Braddock. The better she typed his lie, the safer her truth sat waiting. She ordered supplies that week. Ribbon, onion skin, and carbons. 2 boxes of carbons where one would do, and when the stockroom boy raised an eyebrow, she said the machine ran hot in July and she liked a fresh sheet. He wrote it in the ledger and forgot it by lunch. Nobody counts a secretary's paper. Nobody ever did. Now here's the part you have to sit with. She wasn't just keeping carbons anymore. She was making a second set. Every fair copy she typed for Harlan, the true one and the false one both, she took an extra carbon of. Clean and dark and legible. One for the hatbox. One for the world. Saturdays she rode the 6:15 bus downtown with her handbag on her lap. The county library had a photostat machine in the back, behind the reference desk. And for a dime a page a woman could copy anything she pleased, and no one would ask her why. Eleanor pleased to copy 9 years of the truth. She did it a little at a time. A folder under her arm looked like nothing. A widow doing her church accounts, the girl at the desk figured, and slid the dimes across without a glance. Page by page, Saturday by Saturday, Eleanor Braddock laid the whole rotten scheme out flat under that green glass and let the light burn it onto paper that Harlan Renner would never touch and never see coming. 2 weeks it took her. 22 days from the boardroom to the last page, and when it was done she had 3 sets. The carbons in the hatbox, the photostats in a manila envelope, and the originals still in the files at work, right where they belonged, ticking. Then she wrote the letter. She'd typed it already, that first long night, but typing a thing and mailing it are 2 different countries, and the border between them is the widest line a person ever crosses. She read it over one more time at her kitchen table, under the good lamp, with the royal humming, warm from use. Plain language. No drama. A request for a meeting with the state examiner's office regarding certain discrepancies in the accounts of Renner Machine Works, Ashford, Ohio, signed, Eleanor Braddock, secretary, only the secretary. She almost smiled at that. She walked it to the corner box herself on a Sunday evening, when the street was empty and the street lamps had that low honey buzz they get in summer. She stood there a second with the letter halfway in the slot. This was it. Once it dropped, there was no reaching back in, no unsaying it, no going back to being furniture. She let it go. The little iron door clanked shut, and Eleanor Braddock walked home in the warm dark and slept like she hadn't slept in a month. Because now the machine was hers. Monday she was pouring Harlan's coffee again, same as ever. 2 sugars, splash of cream, the cup set down at his right hand without a word. He didn't look up. He never looked up. He was on the phone with somebody, laughing that big loose laugh. Feet on the desk his father built, telling a man in another city that the numbers had never looked better. She refilled his cup. She emptied his ashtray. She was the machine that never breaks, and she never broke stride. That was the whole trick, and it cost her more than anybody will ever know. To bring the man his coffee and smile when your handbag holds his ruin. To type his lie flawless while your Sundays are spent copying the truth. It's a kind of quiet that has muscle in it. It's not weakness. Don't ever mistake it for weakness. Wednesday, Harlan came out to her desk. She felt him before she saw him, the way you feel weather. Nell, he had the carbon box in his hand, the supply box from the stockroom, and he was frowning at it, hefting it like a man weighing a fish. This feels light. We going through carbons faster than we used to? Her heart went sideways. But her hands stayed on the keys, and her voice came out flat and bored, a woman answering a dull question about office supplies. Machine runs hot in July, Mr. Renner. I like a fresh sheet, they smudge otherwise. I've got more coming Monday." She didn't stop typing. That was the thing. She didn't stop. "You want I should cut back?" He looked at the box. He looked at her. And she just kept on. Click and clack and the little bell at the end of the line, the most ordinary sound in the building, and whatever suspicion had flickered in him guttered right out. Because what was he going to suspect? Carbon paper? From the secretary? "No," he said. "No, order what you need." And he set the box down on the corner of her desk and walked off whistling. She waited until he was gone. Then she let out the breath she'd been holding for 30 seconds that felt like 30 years, and she rolled the finished page out of the royal, and it was perfect. Not a wrong stroke on it. Even scared out of her wits, the machine that never breaks did not break. That was cycle 1. There were 2 more coming, and each one dug a little closer to the bone. The second one had a face on it, and the face was young. Curtis Vane was 24 years old, and he had the kind of open face that hasn't learned to guard itself yet. He came to her desk one afternoon while Harlan was out at the bank, and he had a statement in his hand, and he was chewing his lip the way he did when the numbers wouldn't sit right for him. Miss Braddock. He always called her that. The older men called her Nell, but Curtis called her Miss Braddock, and it touched her more than she let on. "Can I ask you something? You've been here forever. You'd know." 31 years, Curtis. That's not forever. Just feels like it. She set down her pencil. "What have you got?" He laid the statement on her desk. She didn't have to read it. She'd typed the twin of it 3 days before. It was one of the doctored ones, the pension figures dressed up pretty, and down at the bottom was a line for a signature, and the name typed under the line was his. "Mr. Renner wants me to sign these," Curtis said. "Says it's part of moving up. Says a bookkeeper's got to stand behind the books." He looked at her, and there was a worry in him he couldn't name yet. "But this line here, the transfer to the supplier account, the Meridian one. I can't get it to foot against the deposits. It's off by a lot. I figured I was doing it wrong." "You think I'm doing it wrong?" And here it was. The moment the whole thing turned on. She could tell him nothing, and let him sign, and he'd hang. Or she could tell him everything, and expose herself before the trap was sprung, and Harlan would burn it all before the state ever saw a page. There's a third way. There's always a third way, if you're patient enough to find it, and Eleanor Braddock had spent 19 days being patient. "You're not doing it wrong, son," she said it gentle. "Numbers don't foot, that's the numbers telling you something. You listen to that." She slid the statement back toward him, but slow, holding his eyes. "Here's what my first boss taught me, back in '58, and it never once steered me wrong. You date everything. Every single thing that crosses your desk, you put the date on it in your own hand, and you keep a copy for yourself. Your copy, in your own drawer at home, not here." Curtis blinked. "Why my own drawer?" "Because paper's the only thing that remembers exactly. People forget. People change their story. Paper doesn't." She tapped the desk once with one finger. "You sign what they put in front of you, Curtis. You make sure you've got a dated copy of exactly what it said the day you signed it. Not a day later. That way, whatever anybody tells you it said, you've got the truth in your own hand. You understand me?" He didn't. Not all of it. But something in her voice made him nod slow, and fold the statement and say, "Yes, ma'am. Date everything. Keep my own. Good boy." She picked her pencil back up. "Now go on before he gets back." She was arming him. Do you see it? She couldn't tell him the house was on fire without lighting the match herself. So instead, she taught him to carry water. Every dated copy Curtis Vane put in his own drawer at home was a nail she was quietly pulling out of his coffin, and he never once knew she was doing it. He'd taken 3 steps when the door opened, and Harlan came in from the bank, hat still on, and stopped dead when he saw the two of them at her desk with a statement between them. "What's this?" Not a question. His eyes went narrow. Curtis froze. 24 years old and no poker face at all. He'd have given the whole thing away in 2 seconds. But Eleanor was already talking, dry and irritated, snatching the page and turning it so Harlan could see the margins. "His margins are a disgrace. That's what this is. I've told him and told him. Look at that, the whole right side crawling uphill." She thrust it at Curtis. "Retype it. Set your tabs like I showed you. A statement that goes to the bank can't look like a ransom note." She turned back to her machine, done with all of them. "Honestly, they teach you boys nothing at that college." And Harlan laughed. The tension ran right out of him, and he laughed. Because of course. Of course that's what it was. The old girl writing the kid about his tab stops. He clapped Curtis on the shoulder on his way past and said, "Better listen to her, son. She's typed more pages than you've had hot dinners," and he went into his office and shut the door. Curtis looked at Eleanor. She didn't look back. She just gave the tiniest nod at her own machine. "Keep moving." And he went to his desk, and Cycle 2 closed up quiet as a drawer. But the third one. The third one nearly took the whole game down. It came fast, and it came ugly, and it came because Harlan Renner finally got scared. Ostergaard had been around all week, the examiner poking at the files, asking his careful questions in his careful voice. And Harlan, who could charm a bird out of a tree, started to sweat under all that carefulness. Because Ostergaard kept coming back to the same accounts. The supplier accounts. The Meridian line. And Harlan, who thought he had no loose ends anywhere, started seeing the one loose end he'd forgotten to check. The paper. The working copies. The real figures that sat in the files right next to the fake ones, waiting for a man who knew where to look. Friday afternoon he came out of his office white around the mouth, and he didn't bother being smooth about it. "Nell, get your coat. No, stay, listen." He put both hands on her desk and leaned down. The working copies. All of them, going back. I want them out of the files tonight. Every sheet. Bring them out to the lot. She kept her face empty. The working copies, Mr. Renner? Those are our records. If the examiner asks, the examiner's not going to ask, because they're not going to exist. His voice dropped low and hard. There was never but the one set of books in this company. You understand me? One set. Clean. And you're going to spend this weekend making sure that's exactly what the record shows. Retype the history. Nice and clean. Whatever doesn't match the bank copies, it never happened. He straightened up. 26 days I thought I had. Now I've got till Monday week. So we do it now. Bring the copies out. We're going to have a little fire. And that's how Eleanor Braddock came to stand in the gravel lot behind Renner Machine Works on a Friday evening in the long gold light, feeding 9 years of Harlan Renner's own true books into a rusted oil barrel, one page at a time. He stood there and watched her do it. Made sure of it. The flames went up orange and the smoke smelled sweet and awful, and the pages curled and blackened and lifted off into the evening as ash. Every real figure, every honest number. The whole ledger of what the company actually was, burning at the owner's own order, so that only his lie would be left standing when the state came calling. He thought he was watching her destroy the evidence. He was watching her destroy his copy of it. Because every single page in that barrel, every one, was already sitting in a manila envelope in a hatbox on the top shelf of her bedroom closet. Photostated clean under the green library glass. 3 sets deep, 22 days safe. She'd burned nothing that mattered. She was burning his ability to check her. And he stood there in the firelight and nodded, satisfied, watching the machine that never breaks do exactly as she was told. "Good," he said, when the barrel was full of ash. "That's good, Nell. Now go home and start typing. I want the whole history clean by Sunday night." "Yes, Mr. Renner," she said. And she went home. She did not type a clean history. She sat at her kitchen table in the honey lamplight with the retired truth stacked beside her. And she did not type one single lie all weekend. She let him think she was. And that was the longest quiet of all. The one where everything hung on whether a 50-year-old bank examiner would believe a 58-year-old secretary over a rich man's smile. Because that was the fear that sat up with her that weekend. Not that she was wrong. She knew she wasn't wrong. She had it foot perfect, line by line, 9 years deep. The fear was older and meaner than that. It was the fear that had lived in her since the boardroom. That it wouldn't matter what she had. That a man would smile, and a room would nod, and the invisible woman would stay invisible. And the truth in her own clean type would just get swept off the table with the cold coffee. But here's the thing they'd all forgotten. She'd warned them. Way back, weeks ago, before any of this, she'd slid Harlan that memo across the boardroom table. One figure, one line that didn't foot, typed neat, dated in her own hand, handed over in front of 6 men. And he'd laughed at it. "You're only the secretary, Nell. Type what I give you, and leave the thinking to us." That memo was in her handbag right now, dated, in her own hand. And Ray Kowalczyk had watched him laugh at it. So it was all there, not just the proof of the crime, the proof that she'd flagged it honestly, in writing, and been mocked for it. She'd done everything right and been called furniture for it, and she had the paper to prove that too. Morally clean. Legally clean. A woman with nothing to hide and everything filed. Monday of audit week, Frank Ostergaard did not come to the office. He'd gotten her letter, he'd read her photostats, and a careful man who'd spent his life reading books had looked at 9 years of foot-perfect carbons in one unmistakable hand, and he'd known, the way you know, that he was not looking at the work of a woman covering anything up. He was looking at the cleanest thing he'd seen in 30 years of dirty ledgers. So he waited for audit day. Same as Harlan, and on audit day they all sat down together at the long oak table under the clock Gus Renner bought in 1941, the very same room, the very same men, 6 of them, plus Curtis, plus Ostergaard, plus Harlan at the head of it all in his father's chair. And Eleanor Braddock came in with the coffee. Of course she did. Nobody told her not to. She poured it around the table quiet as ever, and set the cup down at Harlan's right hand, 2 sugars, splash of cream, and he didn't look up at her, and that was the last time in his life Harlan Renner would fail to look at Eleanor Braddock. He opened big. He always opened big. He walked the examiner through the year like a man showing off a new car. Revenue up 19%. Strong orders. A supplier account here, a supplier account there. He was warm, he was easy, he made 2 of the men laugh. He was, Ostergaard thought, watching him, the single most confident liar he had ever sat across from. Then Ostergaard opened his folder. "Mr. Renner, before we go on, I want to lay a few things beside each other." And he took out the photostats. 9 years of them. And he began to lay them down the table, one beside the next, the bank copies and the true copies, side by side, foot by foot, in that same clean, unmistakable type. The room went very still. You could hear the clock. That old oak-cased clock, ticking the way it had ticked for 32 years, counting. Harlan's smile held for about 4 seconds. Then it started to come apart at the edges, the way ice comes apart, from the outside in. "What is this?" he said. Same 3 words. No question mark again, but different this time. "Smaller. This is your working ledger, Mr. Renner, your real one. Beside the copy you gave the bank." Ostergaard's finger walked down the pages. "They don't match. They've never matched. The revenue's inflated with orders I can't find a shipment for. And here." His finger stopped. $214,000. out of the employee pension fund, into an account for a supplier called Meridian, which does not appear to exist anywhere in the state of Ohio. Nobody breathed. Harlan came up out of his father's chair. And now he was reaching for the old smile, the charm, the thing that had always worked, and it wasn't there, and you could see him grabbing for a tool that wasn't in the box anymore. Frank, listen to me. This is some kind of, look at this. He snatched up a photostat, and his hand wasn't steady. You don't even know where these came from.
Anybody could have, this is typed up by, this is the work of a secretary. A secretary. She could have cooked this up. She's got a grudge. I had to discipline her not a month ago in this very room. Ask any of these men. He swung around at the table. She's only the secretary. She couldn't produce something like this. She doesn't understand the first thing about... You're right, Miss Renner.
It was the first thing she'd said. Eleanor Braddock, standing by the sideboard with the coffee pot still in her hand, said it quiet, and the whole room turned. Because for 31 years she had said nothing in this room but yes, sir. You're right, she said again. I'm only the secretary. She set the pot down. Careful, no rush. I only typed what you dictated. Both times. She looked at him down the length of his father's table, the working copy and the bank copy. Same hands, same machine. For 9 years. You gave me both, Miss Renner, and you told me to leave the thinking to the men, a pause you could have driven a truck through. I typed them, but I never once stopped reading them. And that was it. That was the whole thing, 12 words at the heart of it, and they landed in that room like a dropped anvil. I only typed what you dictated, both times, because there was no answer to it. He'd handed her the truth and the lie with his own hands and called her too stupid to tell them apart, and she'd kept every carbon. His hand came down on the table. It knocked the coffee cup. The cold coffee, the cup she'd poured him not 10 minutes before, went over sideways and ran across the oak in a brown sheet and dripped off the edge, and nobody moved to stop it. It just ran. Now watch what happened to each of them. Because a room like that doesn't fall all at once. It falls one face at a time. Harlan first. The bluster went out of him like air out of a tire. Slow then all at once. And what was left was an old man standing in his dead father's chair, with his mouth working and no sound coming. 61 years old, and he'd never once in his life been in a room he couldn't talk his way out of. And here it was. And there were no words in it that would work, and you could watch him understand that. He sat back down. He didn't decide to. His legs just did it. Then the manager. There's always a manager, the smooth one who'd laughed loudest at Harlan's jokes, who'd nodded along at every sneer. He'd been sitting close to Harlan's elbow all morning. Now, quiet, without a word, he slid his chair back. Just a few inches. Just enough. Just enough to say to the examiner and to God and to everybody, I am not with this man. I was never with this man. The oldest move there is. Eleanor watched him do it, and something in her went cold and amused. Rats know the water before it comes in. Then Curtis, poor Curtis, 24, white as his shirt, because he'd just heard his own name in the middle of a fraud, and he didn't yet know which side of it he was on. And Ostergaard turned to him almost kind and said, Misters, Vane, your signature's on several of these. And Curtis, God bless him, reached into his own jacket with a shaking hand and pulled out a folder. His folder. From his own drawer at home. Then you'll want these, he said, and his voice cracked on it, but he got it out. Dated copies. Every one I signed, the day I signed it, exactly what it said that day. I keep my own. He looked at Eleanor, just a flash, just a second. Somebody taught me to date everything. And the dates told the whole story. Because his dated copies showed him signing statements that got altered after he signed them. The routing that was supposed to hang him hung Harlan instead, because the boy had a clean paper trail in his own hand, proving he signed one thing and somebody changed it to another. 24 years old, and he walked out of that room clean as rain, and never knew until years later that the woman who saved him did it with one sentence about tab stops. And Ray Kowalczyk, 60 years old, 38 years on that shop floor, who'd been brought up to stand along the wall as a witness. He didn't say anything in the boardroom. He just watched Ostergaard's finger land on the pension line, the $214,000, and he watched the examiner say the word restitution, and Ray Kowalczyk, who'd spent 38 years believing that money was going to be there for him and his wife, put one big hand over his mouth and looked at the ceiling and breathed. That was all. But Eleanor saw it. She'd done it for that. Not for herself. For the pension. For Ray's face doing that. And Ostergaard. He closed his folder. He looked down that table at the secretary by the sideboard, and there was something in his face that she'd waited 31 years to see a man like that give a woman like her. Not surprise. Respect. He gave her a small nod, the kind one professional gives another, and he said, "Miss Braddock, this is the finest set of records I've ever been handed. Thank you. Thank you." 2 words, after a lifetime of snapped fingers. Then the law did the collecting, the way the law does, without any drama at all, which is its own kind of drama when you've waited for it. 2 men from the state came in from the hall where they'd been waiting the whole time. They were polite. They read Harlan Renner his charges standing up, fraud and embezzlement and theft from a pension fund, and they said he could bring his hat. They walked him out through the lobby, past the reception desk, past the switchboard he never once learned her extension for, because why would the owner need to know the secretary's line? And the whole shop floor had come up from the machines, because word travels through a plant faster than fire, and they stood along the yellow line on the floor. 40 men in oil-stained aprons, hats in their hands, and they watched Harlan Renner go by in the custody of the state of Ohio. Not one of them said a word to him. But as he passed, old Ray Kowalczyk, 60 years old and 38 years in, said one thing. Not to Harlan, to the room. Dry as a August field. 31 years, Ray said. Guess she was listening. And a low sound went through the men. Not quite a laugh, something better than a laugh. And Harlan Renner went out the front door of his father's company into the flat summer light, and the door swung shut behind him, and that was the last any of them saw of him standing free. They froze the pension for restitution. Not lost. Frozen and paid back, dollar by recovered dollar, because it turned out you can't spend a fund into a company that doesn't exist without leaving a trail, and Eleanor had that trail too, 9 years of it, foot perfect. The $214,000 came home. Ray got his retirement. All of them did. They offered Eleanor the controller's desk. Ostergaard himself suggested it, and the trust that took over the mill made it a real offer. Corner office, the whole thing, the top financial chair in the whole company for the woman who'd saved it. She thought about it for about 1 second. "No thank you," she said. "I like my own desk. I can see the door from it." And she went back to her chair, and her machine, and that was the end of that. Curtis came to find her, later, when the boardroom had emptied and the coffee had been mopped up, and the summer light was going long and gold through the windows. He stood by her desk the way he always did, 24 and still not sure of his hands. "Miss Braddock." He didn't know how to say it. "Why'd you do it? Why'd you protect me? You didn't have to. You could have let it fall on me and walked away clean. Why'd you cover me?" She rolled a fresh sheet into the royal. Click, and the little ratchet catch. She didn't look up right away. "I didn't cover you, Curtis," she squared the paper. "I never lied for you once. I taught you to keep your own truth. There's a difference, and you'd do well to learn it." Now she looked up at him. "You want to know why?" "Yes, ma'am." "Because you signed nothing you understood." She said it plain. That was your whole trouble, and it near cost you everything. A man put paper in front of you, and you signed it because you trusted him and you wanted to move up, and you never once made yourself understand what your own name was going on. That's how they get you, son. Every time. Not the wicked ones. The trusting ones. She turned back to her machine. "So here's the only thing I've got worth telling you. Learn the numbers, Curtis. All of them. Every line. They outlast the men. The men come and go and lie and get walked out the front door, but the numbers just sit there being true, and if you can read them, you'll never be anybody's fool and you'll never be anybody's fall guy. Learn the numbers." Curtis Vane looked at her a long moment. Then he said, "Yes, ma'am," and this time you could tell he meant to. "Good boy," she said. And she started to type. A year later there was a porch. It sat on the shady side of a small white house on a quiet street in Ashford, Ohio, and on a Sunday afternoon in summer, the light came through the screen door the color of poured honey and lay in long warm bars across the floorboards. There was a glass of iced tea sweating a ring onto a formica tray. There was the far-off sound of a lawnmower and the near sound of bees in the hedge. And there was Eleanor Braddock in a wicker chair with her shoes off, doing absolutely nothing at all, which was a thing she had never in 59 years learned how to do and was finally, slowly, teaching herself. The mill still ran. It ran better than it ever had, as a matter of fact, owned now by the men who worked it, a workers' trust with the pension paid out whole, and a set of books so clean you could eat off them. Ray Kowalczyk had retired that spring with a party and a watch, and a check that was every dollar it was supposed to be. Curtis Vane sat at the controller's desk now, the one Eleanor turned down, and he read every line before he signed it, and he dated everything, and he kept his own copies. And he was getting to be the kind of man who couldn't be fooled. She heard he was good. She wasn't surprised. Inside the little house, on the sideboard by the window, the royal typewriter sat under its gray cover, retired the same season she was. She'd typed her last page on it in that office and brought it home and put it there like you'd stable an old horse that had carried you your whole life. Underneath the cover, still threaded in the platen where she'd left it, was one last carbon. Just one. Dark and clean and unread, the way she liked them. She hadn't taken it out. Some habits you keep just to have kept them. And Harlan Renner. Well, Harlan keeps a ledger too these days. They tell me he keeps it very neat. Only it's not his company's books, and it's not in his own hand, and it's not in his father's boardroom under his father's clock. It's a different kind of ledger, in a different kind of building, counting off a different kind of number, one day at a time, in a place run by the same state of Ohio he thought would never think to look at a secretary's carbon paper. He was certain, no loose ends anywhere. He had one. She poured his coffee for 31 years. So here's what I want you to carry out of this, whoever you are, wherever you're sitting. The quiet ones are reading every line. The invisible woman at the edge of the room. The one who brings the coffee and knows her place, and gets skipped when they go around the table. She is very often the only person in the building who understands the whole thing top to bottom. Be careful how you treat the people who keep your records. Be careful who you call furniture, and if you're the one being treated as furniture right now, treat it as though you don't count, as though you don't understand, as though your work is beneath their notice. You hold on to this. Do your work clean. Keep your own carbons. And wait. Because the machine that never breaks was listening the whole time. That's Nell's story. If it reached you, tell me where you're watching from. Comment the name of your town. I want to see just how far this quiet woman's story can travel.